Alex sat at the dining table, staring at his untouched coffee. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the marble countertop. Emma moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, humming softly as she poured herself a cup. For 10 years, this had been their routine, peaceful, predictable. But lately, something felt off, like a favorite song played slightly out of tune. "Long day ahead?" Emma asked, leaning against the counter, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. Alex nodded, forcing a smile. "Meetings, deadlines. The usual." She offered a small smile in return but didn't press. She rarely did these days. Conversations between them had become surface-level, efficient exchanges rather than real discussions. He used to know every detail of her thoughts, what book she was obsessed with, the little anxieties that kept her up at night. Now there were gaps in her world, spaces she no longer filled him in on. He glanced at his phone, a work email pulling his attention away. The moment passed unnoticed. Emma watched him, her grip tightening on the mug. She knew he was busy, knew his job demanded long hours and late nights. But that didn't stop the loneliness from creeping in, settling in the empty spaces he used to fill. She turned away, shaking off the thought. Later that evening, as Alex sat in his home office, drowning in spreadsheets and deadlines, Emma slipped on her coat. "I'm heading to the gallery," she called out, grabbing her purse. Alex barely looked up. "Enjoy." The door shut behind her, the sound softer than it used to be. The gallery was a world away from the structured precision of their home. It was messy, vibrant, alive. Emma walked through the space, her fingers brushing against canvas edges, the scent of oil paint filling her lungs. She'd always found solace here. "Emma, you made it," a voice called out, smooth and warm. She turned to see Mark, a well-known photographer, approaching with an easy smile. His presence was effortless, confident in a way that drew people in. "Wouldn't miss it," she replied, returning the smile. They fell into conversation, discussing art, composition, the raw emotion behind each piece. It was refreshing, talking to someone who saw the world through the same lens she did. With Alex, conversations were often practical, grounded in reality. With Mark, they felt like stolen moments, full of possibility. The night stretched on, and when she finally checked her phone, she noticed a single unread message from Alex. "Heading to bed. Love you." Guilt flickered in her chest, but she pushed it down. It was just a conversation, just an evening out. Nothing more. Still, as she said goodbye to Mark and stepped out into the cool night air, she couldn't ignore the thrill that ran through her. Spark. Dangerous one. Emma sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone, rereading messages she shouldn't have saved. Mark's words lingered in her mind. Thoughtful, intriguing, different. She had told herself their conversations were harmless, just an appreciation for art and shared perspectives. But there was a shift now, subtle yet undeniable. A notification flashed on her screen. Coffee later. No pressure. She hesitated, glancing toward the hallway where Alex was getting ready for work. She could say no. She should say no. Instead she typed back, "Sure. Just for a bit." By the time she arrived at the cafe, Mark was already there, leaning back in his chair, effortlessly relaxed. He looked up, smiled. "Didn't think you'd come." She laughed lightly, sliding into the seat across from him. "Neither did I." Their conversation flowed as easily as it had at the gallery, skipping the small talk and diving straight into things that mattered. Passion, creativity, the weight of expectations. She hadn't realized how much she missed this, the feeling of being truly seen. "You ever feel like you're living the life you planned instead of the life you want?" Mark asked, watching her carefully. Emma swallowed. "Sometimes." Mark didn't push, didn't fill the silence. He just let the question sit between them. That afternoon, Emma found herself checking her phone more than usual, anticipation creeping into her routine. When Alex texted, it was about dinner plans and schedules. When Mark texted, it was about the book she had mentioned, the exhibit she wanted to see, the things that made her pulse quicken. She told herself it was just a friendship, that it wasn't a betrayal to enjoy someone's attention. But when Mark invited her to a private art event the following weekend, she hesitated for all of 2 seconds before saying yes. That night, as she lay beside Alex, his breathing steady in the dark, she stared at the ceiling, her mind restless. She could feel the space between them growing, an invisible chasm neither of them acknowledged. Alex stirred slightly, his hand brushing against hers. "You okay?" Emma closed her eyes. "Yeah. Just thinking." He was asleep again within minutes. She turned onto her side, facing away from him. The next evening, as she slipped on her black dress, she caught her own reflection in the mirror. She looked different, brighter, more alive. Maybe it was the dress or maybe it was something else. When she arrived at the event, Mark's eyes lit up. He leaned in, his voice warm. "You look incredible." Her stomach tightened. It had been a long time since someone had looked at her like that. She smiled, a quiet rush of exhilaration spreading through her. "Let's go inside." She didn't stop to think about what she was doing. Maybe because deep down she already knew. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of expensive wine and fresh paint. Emma felt the warmth of Mark's presence beside her, his arm occasionally brushing against hers as they moved through the exhibit. Each touch, each glance, carried a weight she wasn't ready to name. "Come with me," Mark murmured, his voice low, intimate. She hesitated only a moment before following him through a side door that led to a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The distant hum of traffic filled the silence between them. He turned to her, eyes searching. "You feel it too, don't you?" Emma's breath caught. There was no point in pretending anymore. She nodded. Mark reached out, tracing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers barely grazing her skin. She should have stepped back, should have ended this before it began. Instead, she let herself lean into his touch. The first kiss was hesitant, uncertain. The second wasn't. By the time she got home, her lipstick was smudged, and her pulse was still unsteady. She paused at the front door, inhaling deeply before stepping inside. The house was dark except for the soft glow from Alex's office. She found him hunched over his desk, papers scattered around him. "You're up late," she said, keeping her voice steady. He glanced up, eyes tired but warm. "Deadlines." She walked over, pressing a kiss to his forehead. He smiled, pulling her into a brief hug before turning back to his work. He didn't notice the way she tensed. Days passed, but the kiss didn't fade. It lingered in the way Mark's messages made her stomach flip, in the way she found excuses to see him again. What had started as a slow unraveling was now a freefall. Mark wasn't just a distraction anymore. He was a secret she didn't want to let go of. One evening, as she slipped into the passenger seat of Mark's car, he reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. The question sat heavy in her chest. "I don't know," she admitted. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. "I could make you happy." She didn't reply. Maybe he already was. The lies came easier now. Meetings that didn't exist, errands that took longer than they should. Alex, always trusting, never questioned. But trust had a way of making people blind. Then one evening, as Emma sat in Mark's apartment, curled against him, her phone buzzed. "Missed call, Alex." Her chest tightened. Guilt crept in, but it didn't burn as much as it should. Mark tilted her chin up, eyes filled with something dangerously close to certainty. "Stay a little longer." And she did. Alex stood in the dimly lit kitchen, phone in hand, staring at the unanswered call. Emma was late, again. She had mentioned an art meeting, but the excuse was beginning to wear thin. He placed the phone on the counter, exhaling slowly. Something was wrong. He had known it for weeks, maybe even months, but he had convinced himself not to look too closely. Till now. A notification popped up on the screen. Message. From Emma. "Running late. Don't wait up." His chest tightened. The words were casual, effortless. Deceptive. An unfamiliar restlessness took over him. He grabbed his keys. Emma was curled up on Mark's couch, legs tucked beneath her, sipping wine. The world outside felt distant, unimportant. Mark sat beside her, tracing patterns on her wrist with his fingertips. It was easy being with him. No expectations, no history. Just this stolen moment. Then her phone rang. Alex. She hesitated, pulse quickening. Mark watched her, eyes unreadable. "Don't answer," he murmured. She let it ring. Alex drove without thinking. His mind replaying every late night, every deflected question, every moment he had ignored the signs. His hands gripped the wheel as he pulled up near the gallery district. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but when he saw Emma's car parked outside an unfamiliar building, something inside him shifted. He stepped out, the cold air biting against his skin. He didn't knock, he didn't need to. The door wasn't locked. Inside, Emma sat up as soon as she saw him, the blood draining from her face. Mark stiffened beside her. The silence was unbearable. Alex's gaze moved between them, the reality settling into his bones. "How long?" His voice was eerily calm. Emma swallowed hard. "Alex! How long?" he repeated, sharper this time. She exhaled shakily. "A few months." Something inside him cracked. Not just because of the betrayal, but because of the ease with which she admitted it. No denial, no panic. Just resignation. Mark cleared his throat. "Maybe I should." Alex turned on him. "Don't. Just don't." Emma stood, arms wrapping around herself. "I never meant for it to happen like this." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's the thing, Emma. It didn't just happen. You chose this." The weight of his words settled between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally he stepped back, his expression unreadable. "I deserve better than this." Emma's breath hitched. She wanted to speak, to explain, but there was nothing left to say. Alex nodded to himself, as if making a silent decision. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. And just like that, it was over.